Welcome to Cars on Call. I am automotive journalist and guest generalist Steve Schutz. I'm here with trauma surgeon Stephan Moran, automotive consultant, collector, and expert Adams Hudson. We're all here. And before we say hi, we got some really cool top subjects. The first one we mentioned in episode 100. We made 100 episodes. Anyway, we mentioned
Yay.
Hey, we're still here.
we're still here.
And the money's flowing in every day.
Not one sponsor left us either.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
true.
And neither one joined us.
Well, we're consistent. That's what we're about here.
We're very consistent. Yeah. So there's a really interesting story that involves a Porsche that's no longer in production. And I won't give up more than that because Adam's going to talk about that. This is a very, very interesting story. I would say unprecedented. We got that story from Jeff Banks, so we'll give him some credit. I'm going to cover 2023, the whole year sales, car sales, new car sales. And I'm just going to go you could spend 2 hours on this. I'm not going to. We're not going to. It'll be about 5 minutes of me just talking about luxury car sales, which are
All right,
interesting.
5 minutes. I'm holding you to it. All right, there we go.
Go ahead.
Start that timer.
And then, of course, we have trauma surgeon safety. And I always take a moment to say we're the only podcast that has a trauma surgeon who has operated on car crash victims and done research on car crashes. And he's here. So he's going to give us his safety segment. And then Adams, no one knows more about collector cars than I know than you do. So you're going to talk about MG. I actually spotted MG, and you're going to talk about it. We went through Jaguar and Buick, and you're going to talk about MG. It's a very, very storied brand, even though it's basically dead now. So let's start at the beginning. Oh yeah, this or that at the end. Let's start at the beginning. Jeff Banks sent me this, and Adams, take it away.
Yeah, Jeff Bank, what a good and faithful listener he is. And he just got a good eye. He's been a guest on our Cars on Call before, but he sent an email to all of us, with a link to a BAT auction, a BAT auction on a Porsche Carrera GT. And I received it. I don't know how you guys, like when you looked at it, I thought, well, he's just sharing his enthusiasm for that particular car because, it's one of 675 ever made. They only made them for 2 years, 600 horsepower, mid-engine, Porsche's only V10 for a road car ever. And I just thought that's why he sent it. Well, in later correspondence, he indicated something that came up in the comments, which I did not know about. He was bringing our attention to the conversation that developed about that car. And it was that within the auction, a fellow Carrera GT owner had said, you realize there's a do not drive edict issued by Porsche that was issued actually in early 23. Now, I didn't get the memo, so I just kept driving my Carrera GT just willy-nilly.
No, this is serious. This is serious. I mean, GM not too long ago with the Bolt, this would have been, I think,
No,
a
the
year
Blazer,
ago.
they put a stop sale
No,
on the
no,
Blazer.
stops. No, they said stop sale to the Blazer. With the Bolt,
Right.
they said do not drive. And you had to park it outside. You couldn't drive it. You couldn't park it in your
So might
garage.
catch far.
This is very Adams. This is might catch fire is right. This is rare.
Not
Well,
fire,
that's it.
far.
It's far.
Far.
We're in Alabama. We say far. But this particular one, and it's scary, just the three words. I mean, when the manufacturer says do not drive, and on one side, it's like, my gosh, this is now nearing a 20-year-old car, which is, first of all, shocking in and of itself. But that Porsche said do not drive. And, the problem, here's part of the news, is that the problem's still not resolved. Now, it was issued almost a year ago, 8, 9, 10 months ago, and it's still not resolved. And when this came to light, when the particular owner mentioned this in the auction, of course, the comments weigh heavily on bidders' minds and certainly on the sellers' minds if they're getting supportive or negative. And this particular person was very authoritative in his commentary that you're not supposed to drive it. And what had happened, the background to the background is that a particular Porsche Carrera GT had been brought into a dealership, of which there are not many who will even work on a Carrera GT. It has to be a special service point with a special tool, special trained tech. And they found a cracked spherical joint up under the suspension.
Oh.
And that alone, that the technician caught it, I mean, that's eagle-eyed in and of itself. I doubt an independent would have noticed it. So he sent,
was that a Boeing employee that was doing the bolts on the doors?
here we go. Then one of the doors fell off shortly
I'm
thereafter.
sorry.
I didn't see that coming. So he sends the thing off to Porsche. They do a metallurgical autopsy. That's what it was called. And they look, and it revealed in the metallurgy that there had been some salt corrosion had gotten in the joint, and then there were some fractures in the joint, and it would not hold
Imagine
it.
these Porsche drivers driving their cars in the snow and salt. Yes. Excuse me.
Imagine.
Is this salt? This must be salt from the California air.
This might
But
have
this
been
is like this is, this could cause a catastrophic suspension failure.
It is it, but the salt, I mean, okay, where's the salt coming from? Do you think these cars have ever seen salt on a Michigan highway?
Steph, that's a good point. Unless maybe it was a Dakar Carrera GT.
But I
But
mean, the
I'm
salt is
thinking
on the
it's
roads, and
coastal.
it doesn't mean you're in the snow. The salt is on the roads. It rains, and then you go out driving.
Yeah.
It's a warm day, and then you can imagine it happening.
Well, I live on the coast, and everything that I don't live on the beach, but I live, probably 60 or 80 yards from the beach, and every unexposed bolt that I have is rusty. So
Right, yeah.
not on my car, but on my house, etc. So anyway, they look at it and they say it's not going to hold up to the triangular stresses, and Porsche says stop driving it. So they sent an email or a notice, however they communicated with them. And since there were only 679 made, maybe there's 450 or 500. I would imagine there's a pretty low attrition rate with these cars because a lot of them have like no miles. But anyway, it was do not drive. And what that really indicates, there's several little layers here of intrigue. First of all, that Porsche was careful enough. Secondly, they had a terrible experience in the American court system given the IMS failure. They had to write big checks for that, and they don't want to suffer that fate again. And then I got to thinking about it. If there's 500 of them left, imagine that those 500 people owning $1.5 million plus car are known people. They're not all famous, but they're famous maybe within their world to even have this level of car. So if there was an accident that Porsche had known about, had some hint that it might happen, imagine the PR downfall. I mean, just the avalanche of negative PR. And so it wouldn't say, oh, this reckless billionaire wrecks his expensive car. It would be Porsche's failure caused this car to wreck. So they're not going to deal with that anyway. So the big point here, and part of why Jeff sent it, is once this comment hit, and Steph, if you want to bring that graphic up, are we looking at the Carrera GT?
Oh, yeah, bring it back up.
Before you bring that up, let's
Yeah.
remember, you talk about a prominent person. Paul Walker, the movie star, died in a Carrera GT about 15 years ago, 10 years ago.
No, and those stories ranked together, Paul Walker and the Carrera GT. That's exactly right. And so you can see that this other car, very similar, same were silver. They sold 33 days apart. One of them had 600 miles, one of them had 1,800 miles. So in the crazy low mile category, yet the bidding post this commentary about the do not drive, which was not mentioned in the first one, caused the bidding to drop not drop, but the final bid price to be 30% less, or about
400,000 less. Wow.
How about that?
That's
a big deal.
Hit.
Yeah.
But it looked like the exact same car, both silver, got yellow calipers. They look,
Yep.
wow.
Very similarly equipped.
$400,000 hit.
Yeah, and it's almost reminds me, Steve, but probably Steph too. You both remember when the Z8 suffered some pretty significant teething pains with cracking their frames, and suddenly the collector world just ran away from those cars until BMW issued a fix. They were cracking their aluminum frames, which would basically turn them into salvage with one crack. And the prices dropped off to nothing. BMW issues a fix, the prices come back up. And I'm sure this will happen with this. So all of you hunting for a bargain on a Carrera GT, now's your chance.
I mean, how hard is it to be to 3D CNC build that upper A arm and swap them out? I mean, it can't be that hard, honestly.
I asked the same question. I have no idea, because you think
Right.
would do that like
Yes.
in
like
72
overnight.
hours. Yeah.
I think it's,
I mean,
you
yeah,
know,
they
Doug DeMuro said that he fixed his suspension. So I think it's very fixable. And I think once you do that, we've got to move on. But you know, it's an obscure, expensive car. This is a rich guy problem, but it sure is interesting.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's
If
interesting to see how the company handles it and to see what the prices do on the vehicle. So it's the after effects that are interesting
yeah.
because
Yeah.
there'll never be one of these in our garage. Maybe Adam's, but not mine.
I guess we'll have to keep driving the cars on call fleet LaFerrari instead.
Yeah.
All right, Steve, what's up?
Let's go viral. Next is luxury sales. And so I find it interesting. I nerd out on the tables of car sales every quarter, and I talk about some of it. I don't want to spend too much time on it because it really is nerdy. But the luxury car
Well,
sales
that's what we
are,
expect from you.
thank you. It's what I provide. So luxury car sales are interesting. First was BMW, second was Lexus, third was Mercedes, and fourth was Audi. I just want to point out a few numbers. I've mentioned this before, but in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s into the 90s, it was so monotonous. Number one Cadillac, number two Lincoln, number one Cadillac, number two Lincoln. And boy, have things changed. They've
Yeah.
changed. They really started changing in the 70s and 80s. And of course, 1990 when Lexus came out. But here are the numbers. BMW, 351,000 and change. Lexus, 320,000. Mercedes, 290,000. Audi, 228,000. By the way, a record for Audi. Cadillac, only 147,000. So less than half of what BMW had. Lincoln, 81,000. Newsflash, this has never happened. I never thought I'd see it, at least not for 20 more years. Porsche, 82,429 cars in the United States. Lincoln, 81,000. Porsche outsold Lincoln. Unbelievable.
Goodness gracious
Wow.
alive. Yeah.
And 30, by the way, 30,000 of those 82,000 Porsches were Macans, and that's going electric. That hit the news today. There's a picture of the electric Macan. I'll just say very quickly for people who are worried, there will be an all-electric Macan. It's going to be released very soon. I am curious to see how related it is to the Volkswagen ID4. So I'm going to measure their wheelbases and see if they're the same. But there will be an internal combustion engine Macan at least through 2026, probably a couple years after that. So just a couple points. The best-selling car individually is about 114,000 Lexus RXs. The BMW has been helped significantly by the X7. So if you go up to the top, the X7, keep going, one more. There's the X7 SUV. That is selling really, really well. It's the biggest
It's
car.
ugly.
It is ugly, but it's nice.
Ugly.
I'm glad you didn't show the front of it.
And then BMW had 25,000 or 11% of Audis were full battery electric. So they're really doing pretty well with that, although only 11%. And then go down to Cadillac, Stefan, and then we'll move on to the next topic. 147,000 Cadillacs, 9,000 of those were Lyrics, not very much, much less than 10%. And the Escalade that gets no respect, scroll down one more. It's, you know, it's not the Antichrist, but it's certainly carbon heavy. 42,000.
Is that up or down
Escalades.
from last year for the Escalade?
It's about the same.
It's about the same.
Not a significant difference. So before we leave this, I'll just say Bentley sold 4,167. And Stefan, you love Bentleys. You love Bentley's cars. I said this for you. 55% of Bentleys were cars, not trucks. So good for them.
Good for them.
Lamborghini sold an amazing 3,600 cars. But it
Yeah,
was
how many were the Urus?
56%. The Urus.
56%. Yep.
Wow.
Amazing.
Yeah, that
Well,
is.
you know, this is the classic. The Lamborghini Urus is the classic example of how a sports car company can continue to pump out cool, great cars on the back of the money brought in by an SUV. And I mean, I hate it, but you know what? It's the Macan and the Cayenne for Porsche. These cars allow the continued development of the ultra cool niche vehicles that these companies all produce. So, but I gotta admit, that is, if you want a badass SUV, there's nothing badder on the road right now than that Urus SUV. That thing is just, I mean, it's bad to the bone. I love
I've
it.
driven it. I've driven it. It is bad to the bone. Having said that, it is basically
Particularly an
a
Audi.
Cayenne Turbo
Uh,
S, and which
okay.
is based correct, Stefan. It's basically a massage, breathed on, tuned Audi engine.
As in a V10,
No, this comes with a
the
V8.
5.2 V10.
V8, the
Gotcha.
V8.
This is the 4-liter V8 from the
Oh,
Porsche Cayenne
wow.
Turbo S. Oh yeah, and the Audi SQ8, same engine. So there you go.
With some Lamborghini nastiness.
You
Yeah.
know, and interestingly enough, before we move on, everything you just said, Stefan, about the SUV kind of being the savior of some of these more marginal and or niche makers plays into our topic tonight on a company that did not follow the pattern of what was selling, and they paid the price.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. I
That's a
mentioned
little foreshadowing there. That's what they call it in the big leagues.
in 2000, Jaguar proudly said at a press launch I went to, they were only going to make cars. It was just after the Cayenne was released, maybe 2003 or so. And Porsche said, no, we're going ahead with SUVs. And at that time, this was 20 years ago, Jaguar and Porsche sold about the same number of vehicles. Now it's not even 10 to 1. It's more than 10 to 1. It's probably 20 to 1. Porsche,
Wow.
Porsche in the lead. So, all
Great
right,
example.
let's move on to safety. And Stefan, what do you got for us?
Oh, quick segue here. All right, safety. So I'm going to talk about winter driving. So we,
You have one of these every single
yeah,
episode.
yeah, I know, I know. I was thought there was something else on the topic. But so my wife and I decided to escape Alabama and we headed down to Jupiter, Florida to my aunt and uncle's. And the weather was lovely while it was 7 degrees back at home. We landed at the airport this last Wednesday and it's 10 degrees. They had to jump start her car because it wouldn't start. And we're coming down the road and I-22, which is interstate between Birmingham that goes to Memphis. The inner lane was completely covered with snow and ice. And it's 10 o'clock at night. And I'm driving through basically frozen ice that looks like snow. So it looks perfectly white like snow, but it's not. It's solid ice. So we had to drive that all the way to home, and it was a very harrowing drive. So we're going to talk about winter driving. And Steve-O, I know you drive up there in Idaho all the time. Adams, you don't get it where you are, but 70% of the population of the United States lives in places that have snow and icy conditions during the winter. And that includes, me in Alabama. 70% of our roads in the United States are in snowy areas. So that increases the threat of an accident significantly. And overall, about 17% of vehicle crashes occur in snowy conditions. And I would say if you're in Alabama and it snows and people go out, that may be 90%.
Mm,
Yeah. So there
wow.
may be 17% across the country, but not in Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia. So let's talk about some overall averages. So if we get a bad winter, what are the average things that we can expect? Well, about 562,000 Americans get into weather-related car crashes in the winter, which leads to about 138,000 injuries every year. And it leads to about 1,800 deaths every year because of winter weather conditions. And one thing that's interesting is every year, for once Alabama is not number one, because we usually are number one or the last, depending on whether it's an inverse or direct relationship to something good or bad. But Ohio is the worst state when it comes
Mm.
to driver fatalities. And they get about 86 deaths a year from winter driving. So the key is, so talking about winter driving, what can we do? What can you do to make winter driving safer? Well, if you live in Alabama or Georgia, it's simple. Don't drive. Okay.
Stay home.
Stay home. And I mean, so I had to leave and I was going hunting and I had to take a big detour because our local road was closed. And there, going up the road, just snow and ice everywhere, was a Ram pickup truck in the ditch. And all you could see was a tailgate that said four-wheel drive. But
Uh,
all right, but that's not the point. Four-wheel drive does you no good. All-wheel drive does you no good unless you've got winter tires. So the key to understand, and Steve can talk about, he has winter tires. Winter, so in northern countries like Iceland, they mandate studded tires. Other northern countries mandate winter tires, depending on the time of the year that you have to have them. So that they design the rubber and the treads so that there's improved tire adhesion, braking, cornering, not acceleration, but the important thing is adhesion, braking, cornering, because the rubber, the tire actually packs itself with snow, and it's that snow on snow that provides you traction. But the other thing important is if there is no snow, when it's below 45 degrees, that rubber that's in that tire provides you better adhesion to the concrete, tarmac, whatever it is you're driving on. In winter tires on packed snow, decrease your stopping distance by 35% versus summer tires. So I mean, it's a big deal. So it's 35% if you're on your standard mud and snow tires. But the last thing you want to do, like my Bullet, which has got summer tires, that on snow and ice is just terrible. It's the worst thing you can imagine. So we all think we've got these mud and snow tires, these all-season tires that are supposed to perform well. Well, they really don't in the snow, in the pure snow. It's better than having a summer tire, but it's not what you need. So in Canada, what they've looked at is there's a 49% increase in insurance claims in cars that don't have snow tires. Now, we all have this perception that what you want in the snow, regardless of your tire, is to have an all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive vehicle. Well, it doesn't matter whether you've got two wheels or four wheels. If you got the wrong tires, it's completely worthless. And there's a great video on YouTube. There's this indoor snow skiing slope in, I think it's Abu Dhabi. But they've got a 4Runner going up the track and up the ski slope in all season tires and all-wheel drive. And then they've got a front-wheel drive car with snow tires. And of course, the 4Runner can't make it up, loses control, but the two-wheel drive car with snow tires goes up. And then the other thing we think is, well, I've got my mud and snow tires. I'm going to rely on my crash avoidance technology to help me out, the anti-lock brakes. Well, that doesn't work either. So really what you need is you need winter tires, and then depending on where you may live, it may be studded tires, but snow tires on your car, either on all four wheels, even if it's a two-wheel drive, all four tires if it's all-wheel drive. And that really gives you the best driving advantage. And Steve, I'm gonna let you speak this in a minute, but a couple other things about driving in the winter is don't use your cruise control. You need to be prepared to be on the gas or on the brakes. So I was coming home down the interstate and we'd have clear interstate and then we'd have completely covered interstate. So what I would do is I'd slam on my brakes on the tarmac that I had, release the brakes in time to allow the car then to settle. So basically your car is just now simply gliding. You've not loaded the front tires, you've not loaded the rear tires, you're not on the gas, so the tires that are getting traction may now spin. So basically what you're doing is you're coasting across the snow and ice, which gives you the maximum traction on all four tires. And then what I would do is I'd be slow enough. I would then hit the brakes, testing to see how much traction do I really have. And that then determines the speed that I can safely travel on the snow or ice that I'm at. So if I hit the brakes and I'm doing 30 and I barely touch the brakes and I start to slide, I'm backing it down. Then I tried at 20, then I tried at 15. So I keep trying it at speeds that are where I can determine my safety. You got to increase the distance between you and the car in front of you. The last thing you want is a car in front of you to lose control, and then you can't get control of your car, and then you slam into them. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll see cars too close to me. I will tap on my brake lights, like flashing, like, hey, get the blank off of my ass, stop and slow down. Because so I do that brake tap. It's not a brake check, but it's a brake flash, hey, back up, because if I lose control, I don't want you hitting me. And then, simple things.
He's really doing them a favor,
I'm doing them a favor, but most people don't look at it that way. And we came around to our neighborhood, we got a couple of big hills. I stopped at the top of the hill And then I started down the hill, constantly brake checking, engaging my anti-lock to figure out what was the safe speed to go down. And then you need speed going up. And then if your road is angled, you want to be on the high side so that if you start to slide, you've got more room to travel. Because if you're on the low side, going around a corner and it's highly angled, you lose traction. You're going off in the ditch. So give yourself some room. And then the last thing I want to talk about is, I want to talk about seat belts. You're dressing your kids all up, you're getting them, you've got their clothes on them. Well, unfortunately, what you don't want to be is you don't want to be like this. Okay.
Uh,
This is Ralphie. Ralphie's little brother Randy in the Christmas story is all dressed up in his snowsuit. You try to put this kid in the back seat in the seatbelt doesn't fit. So you got to realize that when you have your kids layered in 10 layers and you throw them in the back of a cold car because you didn't want to warm it up, well, now your seat belts aren't going to work properly. So warm that car up, take them out there in their jacket, take them out, have their normal clothes on, normal fitment of the seat belt. And the same should be for you. So that if you unfortunately are involved in a motor vehicle collision, you lose control. These seat belts will perform like they are designed to. But if you're looking here like Randy in Christmas Story, they're not going to work properly.
Steph, you always bring up good points. And I know that there are a lot of people out there, especially like you mentioned, the states that are not used to seeing snow, and then suddenly they get snow. Because I mean, I'm currently in Georgia, but I have lived in Alabama forever and now at the beach. But we just don't ever think that there's snow. Therefore, no one ever buys snow tires. I mean, it's just not a thing that you do. So you're always caught unawares, unprepared. And you mentioned something interesting that I think is almost generally applicable. People say, when you said do not use your cruise control in the snow, because of course your wheels do not know that you don't have traction for a little bit of time. It's waiting on the decelerometer to understand the difference between the tire speed and the road speed, but also not in the rain. Can you explain that a little bit to people, like why you should not use cruise control in those conditions?
Right. So when you're driving in the rain, what you're worried about is a senior moment here. You're worried about aquaplaning. So what you're worried about is you get water buildup beneath your tire, and now your cruise control kicks in the gas to try to maintain your speed, where there's not enough traction, and then you kind of lose traction. Then the anti-lock brake kicks in. But you're absolutely right. In heavy rain, do not use your cruise control. Because if you have you will feel your car start to move before the cruise control does, and then you just back off. But yeah, in 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 conditions that are not proper, meaning dry roads, definitely do not bend your cruise control in the heavy rain or on the snow.
Good stuff.
that's a good point. I'll say very quickly, since I do live in the snow belt, I think
Yeah.
the number one thing, Stefan, is if you don't have to go out, don't go out.
Don't, yeah, I mean, okay, I was leaving town because I was going hunting. I had to detour, and I followed a guy 15 miles due north. He was just going to Jack's. Okay.
Yeah.
I
Going out to get
mean,
going out to get a pack of cigarettes. No.
yeah, no.
So
But I
that's
know
number
you've
one.
driven to Sun Valley a bunch, Steve-O, and
Yeah.
you've seen people in the ditch, and you put snow tires on your car and your wife's car. You put those fancy what are those tires you do?
This is a
Acapullitas.
tip from yeah, Hockey Politas, Nokian. So a tip from a guy named Steve Lipscomb, who is a real car guy. And he just sold his
Unlike the pretenders you got here.
Yeah, he's a
Did
real
you
car guy.
catch
Like
that, Steph? I was offended.
I've worked with, I've been partners with two car guys. One was Steve Lipscomb, one is Jeff Bank. But he swears by Nokian, like the phone with an N at the end. Hakapolitas. Don't ask me to spell it. As you know, Adams, you can't spell it. But they're from Finland and they're great. And my car has them, and Elisa's car has them. So have good tires. That's the most important thing. And just be careful and go slow. And again, stay at home if you don't have to be out there.
So tell me about those tires in the snow, Steve. Are they like, I mean, you probably have more traction than you could ever imagine.
They have a lot of traction. The problem is, you think you're great on snow, but you get on black ice or
Oh,
icy roads, but
yeah,
especially
right.
black ice, nothing's going to help you. So just be prudent, be smart. Everything you just said, Stefan, I don't want to repeat it because it was really well said. So that's all I have to add. And yeah, let's try to stay inside. Anyway, we'll move to car spotting because that ties directly into something that Adams is going to talk about. Adams, you've wanted to talk about this for a while, and then I spotted two MGBs. These are like mid 70s because they have the impact bumpers on them. There's one for sale, and then there was another one. And basically, these were when we were kids, these were like real sports cars. They probably do 0 to 60 in 11 seconds.
Yeah.
But so what? They had a manual transmission. They were small. They weren't a big boat, and they were cool. And they were sports cars. When I was a kid, I thought they were very cool. And then they just died. And so I saw these. And Adams, you've talked about this MG and what happened to MG. So I thought, let's have Adams go through it, go through the history like you did with Jaguar. You know, it is a rare sight to see an MG.
It is. It has become a rare sight. When I was in college, we got me and a couple other car guys, and they were real car guys. Unlike this sorry crew. No, when we were just sort of like car aware, we were all in college, sort of car aware. We could hear it. We could pick an MG coming up the street
Yeah.
well before we saw it. It has a very distinct exhaust note, and there are plenty of them because it's college town, you know, and that's what people could afford. And they were fun cars. But MG really has and had a wonderful history and a wonderful run. And I think it's almost exemplary of how somebody can have a very good idea. The market agrees that it's a very good idea. It's priced accordingly, et cetera. And then things change dramatically. And MG, in a sort of similar vein to Jaguar, there are some similarities, and listeners can pick up on this. But MG was started back in the 1920s. When you think about, you know, the 1920s, United Kingdom, very agrarian society, you know, the green fields of Great Britain, and they were good machinists. The Industrial Revolution caught them just like it caught in the U.S. And, you know, they steel everywhere and manufacturing facilities. Well, a young man named Cecil Kimber, and I'm not sure you can have a more British name than Cecil Kimber.
That's pretty good.
He starts working with the guy who is a few years his senior, a guy named William Morris, and the place is called Morris Garages. So they're in the 1920s. They're both fascinated with mechanical things, as you know, a lot of young men of that time. And Morris had built a pretty successful car line called, understandably, the Morris. And they were just they were smaller, kind of boring cars, sort of efficient, but they got people from A to B, and he sold a few of them. They also did service work, et cetera. Well, Cecil Kimber was a real personality. He could sell, he was enthusiastic, customers liked him, and he soon became the top salesman for this brand called Morris. And, you know, you would see those every now and then in the US when people imported them, but not a lot. And so he starts modifying these cars a little bit. He hops them up a little bit. He puts on lighter bodies. He's taking out weight. He makes the windshield a little bit more rakish so it appeals to a younger audience, and he prices them accordingly. And he's starting to sell these cars. And so there's orders coming in. There's more orders coming in than he can fulfill because he's just a sort of a shoestring operation within the Morris Garage. Well, since he is within Morris Garage, he is in a hurry to come up with a name for his new car. So he names it by the initials of that place, MG. And that is the beginning of this. And so he's making a name for himself with smaller, lighter cars. And he decides in the mid 40s that he is going to, of course, we're talking about war years, but he decides he's going to make a car really for young people, a two-seater car. And so in 1947, sadly, he had left the company in 1947, but he'd already designed this car, and it became, and if you want to take a look at the graphic of what Stefan's showing, the MGTC, there was a TC and a TD, and these were upright little narrow cars. They actually had wooden floorboards, if you can believe that. They were running like a tractor engine. I mean, that's what was plentiful then, a little 1.5 liter tractor engine, a little four-cylinder. And it's reliable, it's sporty enough, and the servicemen are just loving it. There's a ton of USA service guys in the UK at the time, and they, on the GI Bill, they can export them for next to nothing. And we were talking about sales figures as we started the show, was what Steve was talking about. They sold 30,000 of these. They put 30,000 of them in American driveways. So they're doing pretty good. Now, this is,
Wow.
I mean, think about that. Like way back then, people are scrambling post-war just to do anything.
So
And they
Stefan's favorite automotive journalist of all time, David E. Davis, he did that. He was a serviceman over in Europe, and he brought a MGTC over to the US, and that's what sparked his whole car enthusiasm and his whole career.
I did not realize that. And he's one of my favorite journalists as well. I did not realize he'd gotten his start, but I think for a lot of people, it sort of introduced I mean, think about it. 1947, that was what, 6 years before the Chevrolet Corvette. People weren't even like, what is that? Or what do you call it? What do you mean sports car? So it was a different sort of thing to see. And like a lot of, it's about 55 horsepower. So a lot of things that were early post-war, because remember, there'd been a hiatus on manufacturing anything new for retail because of all the war effort. And so it dated itself pretty quickly, and bang, 1956, if you want to show that MGA, look how radically different this car. I mean, it's envelope bodied instead of the cycle fendered car, gorgeous, low slung convertible. And it was later available as a coupe. And Steph, I'm not sure if do you have the picture of that coupe?
That's pretty cool.
There you go. Now
Beautiful.
look how handsome that is. I mean, to me, if you did not know any better and somebody said that was a Jaguar XK, you'd go, yeah, it probably is. But that has roll-up windows, which if you got to admit, that was kind of a thing. That was like a big deal, roll-up windows and a snug little coupe. Well, MG at this time, I just want to make the point that in this era, they start to produce a twin cam inline four for this coupe body. It puts out 108 horsepower. And that particular motor, the twin cam, was terribly unreliable and they gave up on it. But nonetheless, they were experimenting. At the same time as they have that car, Porsche has the 356, which has 47 horsepower and pull strings for door handles. I mean, so if you're looking at Porsche and MG is by far, at that time, we realized Germany, quote, lost the war, but MG was light years ahead of Porsche.
And hey, I have to say that in addition to David E. Davis, Denise McCluggage also raced the TCs and loved the TCs. She's one of my other favorite automotive journalists and racers.
Wow.
She passed away in 2015, I think at the age of 88, but a real female juggernaut in the automotive racing and journalist history. She was a big MG fan.
Well, she was a big name in racing, journalism, and she pioneered more things for women in those two sports than probably anyone. So that deserves a special moment of recognition. And so MG's got, sort of the world by the tail on this at this time. They're advanced, selling a ton of cars. They're showing Americans what a sports car can do. And bang, what do they decide to do? They decide to go set the land speed record. And Steph, if you'll pull up, look at that unit. So check this out. So just look at the picture of that car. That is a 4-cylinder engine, 1.5 liters. They supercharge it. They use methanol injection. They get 300 horsepower out of this car. If you're looking at that body, do not mistake that for a de Havilland fuselage that they cut the wings off of like everybody else was doing in land speed records. They would just take these aircraft and they'd cut the wings off and call it a car. Well, that's sort of
That looks
cheap.
like a death trap, man. A complete death trap.
I knew our safety editor would weigh in on
I mean, it
that.
looks like a bar of soap with a wing on the back. Oh my God, I couldn't imagine.
Well,
I
they
think
hammered
they
that.
got to be safe, Stefan. I think they wear seatbelts.
Yeah. Yeah, your face was the airbag in that thing.
Hey,
But
Adams, what year is that?
that is 1959.
Wow.
They banged that car out, and the person you see standing there next to it is none other than Sterling Moss.
Where I guess I don't
see
have that
anybody
picture.
standing
There he
down
is.
All right,
There he
Oh
is.
my gosh. Look how small that
so
thing is.
small.
And
Wow.
so, and if you look back to the safety comment, that's a good thing for you guys to pick up on. If you will look at the windshield, what you would call it, pass for windshield, that was shaped with him seated in it to barely clear his helmet.
Wow.
That was shaped. That car in 1959 did 254 miles an hour.
Woo.
Now
Yeah,
that's
the-
out
Hey,
there.
he reached
So
down and found a pair to do that, and that thing was.
I'm
Yeah,
thinking
Stefan,
he did.
the crumple zone is him.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? When I look at this first picture, it looks like
It
a
looks
pretty
different.
big car. It looks like a big vehicle. And then you scroll to this picture with him standing next to it. That thing is like basically it's a four-wheel motorcycle with a little bit of body on it.
Yeah.
Wow. Cool.
No,
I had
you're
no
right.
idea that Sterling Moss did speed records. I mean, I always loved Sterling Moss. What a gentleman, and Sir Sterling Moss. But
Oh,
I had
yeah,
no idea
sir,
that he did
exactly.
speed records.
Well, I think MG had enough power and clout to do it, and they knew what publicity was, obviously. So they set that record. The last little point on that, and then we'll move on to the MGB, the one that everybody knows, the one that we introduced this with. That particular car back in that year had an aerodynamic drag coefficient of 0.12. And you're thinking, what in the world? Who
Wow.
cares what that is?
That's
You know,
huge.
it's unbelievable. So the lower the better, the lower the slipperier. A Jaguar E-type by comparison has like a 0.35. So 3 times that for something that we would consider slippery.
Wow.
An F1 car of today has a drag coefficient of 0.07 to 0.1, which is remarkable. I mean, with all the wind tunnel testing that has gone on for the last,
Yeah.
whatever, 80 years. So, all right, so they're selling a bunch of cars, and in 1962, they come out with the beloved MGB, and that's where we started this. And if you want to take
Hey, I'll take the little Dutch girl sitting on the hood.
did you even notice there was an automobile in that photo?
No, I did not.
Actually, yes.
Amen.
I've got a couple of vintage ones coming up, but this car's in 63, and then by 1965, listen to the advancements. In 1965, they develop a 5-bearing engine with that car, of an all synchromesh transmission, including first, and they add a gorgeous GT, the MGB GT, which was styled by none other than Pininfarina. That's who they hired to design the back half of that car, and it shows it. So much like Triumph hired Micheletti to take the TR4 to the TR6, they hired Pininfarina. I mean, the MG was a force to be reckoned with. And so in racing, the MGB, and I hope this is not overstating it, and if it is, I'm sure the internet's going to light me up. The MGB was the Mazda Miata of its day.
Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah.
That's a great comparison. Yep.
Well, they were on SCCA tracks
Yes.
all over the world. They were on pylon courses all over the world. They were in rallies and hill climbs any given weekend. You could race them for next to nothing. And if you broke it, you went down and bought the tractor part to fix it. A 64-piece starter set Craftsman toolkit, you could dismantle the entire car. I mean, they're very simple, very
I like
approachable.
that.
And so here we go. Labor troubles. Anybody heard that before mentioned with the US or UK?
Oh yeah, yeah.
There you go. So here's the writing on the wall. Labor troubles and mismanagement, exactly what killed Jaguar, starts to leach in, and without going to the boring history of how Jaguar and Austin Healey and MG became BMC, then BMC can't hack it, and they add Triumph into the fold and call themselves British Leyland, and just, then they just can't make a good decision. They kill Austin Healey for reasons no one could ever figure out. They basically gave that slot to Triumph. They're sitting there looking at the gorgeous 3.5 aluminum V8 that we mentioned back in the Buick segment that Rover had gotten the license to. So they have a lightweight V8 that will fit in the engine bay of an MGB, and they don't use it. Privateers are so enthused about fitting it that they're putting it in their own cars. And what does MG do? And it's easy to look back through the lens of history and say what was wrong, but they had the information at the time. So MG decides in 1966 to come out with the MGC, not the V8. It's an inline six, which is based on the 2912cc Austin motor, but it's a worse motor. It's heavier than the 4-cylinder. It has no real power advantage. You can imagine what it did to the handling. So to say it was a failure is putting it mildly. And finally, and you can pop this graphic up, MG gets a little wind of brilliance after 7 years of overlooking the GT with the V8, and they put it in the V8 in the MGB GT, and so they've got this V8 in there, and you see the ad. Is that ad showing up?
There it is.
Yeah, which is a great headline. But this is 1973, and I'm telling you, the Datsun 240Z was not exactly scared of the MGB V8 outselling it. They sold a whole 2,000 cars, and it, didn't do them any great favors. Final nail in the coffin was the rubber nose, the one that Steve showed, the rubber nose, raised height,
Yep.
single carb motor of 1975 when it came out. And there you go. The
Wow.
writing was now coming to the end of the sentence, and they put a period on that sentence in 1980, and that was the end of MG.
Adams, obviously, they were way ahead of Porsche in the 50s, and yet by the time this car came out in 1975, 74, 75, Porsche was way, way ahead. Their cars were way, way better regarded. They were better cars. They drove better. They looked better. They were cooler. They were much faster. You can't
Yeah.
just sit there, which is what they did, and that's the shame. And
Eddie,
it's
yeah.
just a shame because they could have done so much and they didn't. I guess, before we lay it on too thick about what the mistakes they made, Stefan had a Bug Eye Sprite, which was built by British Leyland, the predecessor anyway. And Stefan, you enjoyed that car. So let's give MG some and the British car, sports cars, some love.
Yeah, I was driving home. I was on call. I think it was 1988. That was my 30th birthday. No, it would have been 88. Anyway, I don't know what the hell the year it was. I was driving home. It was my 30th birthday. I was on neurosurgery as a resident. And there's a 60 Austin Healey bug-eyed Sprite parked on the side of the road. And I see this car and I'm like, I gotta have it. It's just that simple. I have to have this car. And I pulled over and I bought that car and I had a blast. My wife has horrible memories of that car. It still had it still had a generator, so she had to push me all the time because that thing would just kill a battery. It somehow on its own it caught fire in the garage, burned up the wiring harness. I mean, Lucas Electronics, but
Yeah.
Now,
that
Stefan,
was
just for our younger listeners, she's not pushing you to the shop.
no,
She's jump starting you.
she's pushing me down the road so I can pop the clutch to jump start the car. And yeah, I'm trying to I had a picture of it here. Let me find a
It's a
picture of it.
it's a cute little car, and it's called a
Yeah.
bug eye or a frog eye for a really good reason.
Yeah, and I'm gonna pull it. So I love a Healy, and I looked at the 3000s, but this is, I mean, you look at, here it is. Here we go.
Yeah.
It's just happy. It's laughing.
It's laughing. So I had this Healy I had a 1275 upgrade on the engine. I had a synchro mesh transmission, which made it a lot easier to drive than the originals. And it was an absolute blast to drive. People loved looking at it. It had oversized tires. This was it was not totally original, but it was a great driving car.
And Steph,
Yeah.
I know you remember this, but I'm going to remind our listeners, mine and Steph's first sports car was the exact same thing.
Yep.
A
Wow.
1960 bug-eyed Sprite. And a fun story about why that bug-eyed Sprite is sitting there. Donald Healy had presented this car to the board for BMC and said it's going to have hideaway headlights. And somewhere the accountants got a hold of it and said, no, for 50 less bucks, or $50 more for the hideaways, we're not per car, we're not doing it. Just stick them wherever you want. And that's where they landed.
So they didn't evolve. They died. It's such a shame. Adams, are any of these collectible?
Steve, that is a really good question. I wasn't prepared for that, and I won't make the answer very long. I would say they are. I would say the V8s are collectible. The pre-74, actually 74 and a half, somewhere around September that year.
That was the chrome bumpers instead of the rubber bumpers.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
okay.
The chrome bumper cars, and it follows basically what you would think of the 240Z, the
Right.
72s are really strong, and then 73 they went to the square top carburetors. MG followed basically the same deal. Like after 72 or 3, the power starts to drop off. And that 1980 version that you showed of the two that were for sale, that car regressed. It went from like 105 horsepower and a pretty lazy 0 to 60, but in the day it was okay. It dropped down to like 79 horsepower. So those cars are not collectible at all. And I'm afraid the MGTC TD that we mentioned so fondly, I'm afraid those have aged out. They are the Model Ts and Model As of their world.
Yeah,
Like a
the problem
55
with
Chevy.
the problem
Yeah.
with the 70s, and this was true for muscle cars too, it was true for lots and lots of cars, but particularly muscle cars and these British cars. You had smog controls, so climate or these smog controls, catalytic converters came in 1973, so that made the horsepower go down, and then safety regulations came in, so you had heavier bumpers, so you had more weight and less power. It's exactly what you didn't want.
Yep. And Steve made a very good point before we transition right out of this, because exactly, you cannot stand still in any industry that is expecting you to be fresh and innovative. And MG had it going on at the time. As we mentioned, the arc of Porsche, they were well behind, then they crept ahead. That is a blink of an eye. From 1965 to 1975, it's just bam, like that. Porsche was farther ahead than they were behind just 10 years previously. And they advanced, MG solidified.
It's such a shame.
Yeah.
All right, let's do this or that because I know it's a British thing you've got. We're going to keep the British theme going.
Well, I feel like I've dominated this one. I didn't mean to, but I was assigned such a task, as the elder statesman of the group.
Who's going to do it, right? You know all this stuff. These older cars, collector cars, man, no one knows more than you.
Well, these are the ones that, the this or that premise, for anybody who may have missed one. It's just basically taking a common scenario of somebody who's got either the time or the money. In this case, this scenario is set up for a guy who has now got his children, we presume, of driving age. They've got their own cars, and dad or mom wants to tinker with something. We'll call him dad. He's got about 40 grand to spend. He's got an extra place in the garage. He knows how to turn a wrench. He doesn't want a muscle car. Let's make that clear. He does not want a muscle car. He wants a two-seater sporting car. He and his wife can go out on date night. He can play with on the weekends. He wants chrome bumpers. He wants carburetors, and he doesn't mind messing with it. He doesn't want a show car either. So he's got about 40 grand. And so this or that is either the flag waving stalwart of the English sports car lineup, the Jaguar E-type, which I believe you may have one. And folks out there, don't go correcting me on the 40 grand yet. This is a Series 2, not a Series 1. So just keep that in mind. Still a very handsome car, open headlight car, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody can tell that's a Series 2. And at about 40 grand, which is what that sold for right before Christmas. And the other option is he keeps thinking, man, the car that really displaced all these British sports cars was that one. Yep. The Datsun 240Z. Steph, did I not send you a hot link? You would have thought I would have helped you out there. But anyway, that particular one, is it coming up?
There it is.
So wonderful. And there you go, the Datsun 240Z. I know at least one person on this podcast who is a real big fan of this car. So pit this car against the E-type, Steve.
It's the For me, it's a no-brainer. I was never really interested in British cars. I thought the E-type was absolutely beautiful. The MG I always thought was cool. The Triumph TR6 in particular I thought was cool, but I never ever wanted to own one. And
Oh, you mean of
I
any of those British cars? You thought that, but you
none of
never.
them.
Okay.
Not interested in any of them. Too many problems, too many leaks, too many electrical problems. I was never
Look
interested
at
in
it.
owning one. It's beautiful, but again, it's just not my thing just because of the problems. I don't like problems. I owned a 1972 240Z, and I wish I had it back. It was so much fun to drive. A wonderful inline six 2.4 liter, of course, hence the name. Four-speed manual transmission. It drove great. It was so much fun. I thought it was wonderful. So for me, it's an absolute no-brainer. Steph.
Yeah.
I'm going Jaguar, baby, all the way, man. Oh yeah,
The
there's nothing.
Jaguar.
The Jaguar. There is nothing cooler, sexier, penile extender. Just this car, just the shape of this Jaguar is just it's so iconic. I love the 240Z. I mean, I think it's a fantastic car, but I think, but after 3 months of ownership of Lucas Electronics in the engine, I might get a little flustered. And I know Adams can speak to the cost of fixing something on this car, bringing it nice, the cost of restoration on even this Series 2 coupe, they're astronomical costs compared to probably the Datsun. But I think this would be a love-hate relationship. I'd have this car like my Healy. I'd love it until my wife is pushing it down the road because something failed once again. But the wire wheels, the bonnet that folds forward, everything about this car just exudes. This is like your once in a lifetime James Bond moment. So I take the Jaguar.
I like both of your thought processes there, and I don't disagree with either of them. And I mean, I'm not sitting here trying to like force a split decision here, but I've had a number of E-types, and my gosh, if I had six cars that I was looking at, I would pick this just to look at it. I mean, it's just
Yes.
like it's a sculpture as much as it is an automobile, and thankfully so, because they don't have the greatest reputation for staying running. But you know, the bad thing about Lucas Electronics, everybody gives them a hard time. Two big problems. Nobody fixes the grounds on them. The second big problem is that they try home repairs that just don't work. Anyway, a Jaguar can be made reliable. So I'll go on record as having said that. And also having said that, I'm gonna throw you guys a curveball. I'm picking the 240.
What?
Oh,
No, oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
I
look at
don't
that.
have I don't have room for multiple cars, so
That's
I'm
because
putting
you've owned a Jag and it's a painful ownership experience.
The burnt child shuns the flame, Stefan.
But I have enjoyed my E-types, and I can say that with an open mind and a sincere heart. I have enjoyed them. They're fun to look at. They're fun to play with, and honestly, they can be made reliable. So I'm not even picking on that point. But having been there, done that, and it is one of the more complicated automotive designs ever, ever. All you got to do is look at the chunk of the four-shock rear suspension and differential laying on the ground after it's been taken out, and it's like crazy race car technology.
Yeah.
But the 240, you know, for the dude who wants to tinker in his garage, I would take a 240. Probably not in silver, but I would love a 240. I think I've had two of those, and I didn't own either of them long enough.
But here's the other thing about the 240, which makes it the better long-term investment. This is a car that will appeal to younger people in
Mm,
5, 10, 20 years. There will
yeah.
be zero appeal for a Jag. But a Datsun, this is a historical vehicle because the JDM market is blowing up. That's where the money's at in the younger kids. They want all the cool cars from Japan. This is kind of like a heritage Japanese vehicle that, without a doubt, is your better investment choice. So for me, I'd love to see the Jag, but if I want to buy a car that realistically in 10 years, 5 years, I can dump, have money turn over, this is the car, like you said, this is the car you want to buy, not the Jag.
You know, I think that was the prophetic collector statement that I should have had, you just had, and that's correct. I mean, there's our safety editor popping in with the collector statement, and I think that's exactly right. I'm afraid that the Jaguar is going to always be beautiful and always a bit of a mantelpiece car, but
Yes,
this is
exactly.
something you can use.
You can
Yeah.
use, and people will take this car, they'll resto it, they'll jack up the engine, because this engine is the same basic inline six that you can find through a lot of Japanese cars. So this is a car that that appeals to the next generation of automotive enthusiasts, whereas the could end up kind of being like a 55 Chevy, you know? I mean, it appealed for a while, but then it ran out.
Yeah.
It ages out. Yeah.
It ages out. And this, I don't think will age out.
All right. Well, that's it. You had the last word. So go ahead and take the picture down and we'll say goodbye.
Hey, yeah, so
Or you'll say goodbye.
I'll say goodbye. So, hey, I think with Steve, we hit what, 100? We're close to 100 subscribers on YouTube.
Yeah.
Oh, we're going big, guys. We are going double platinum here, and our sponsors are rolling in. My phone is burning up. So remember, like, listen, subscribe, tell all your buddies, your gals, everybody. Hit those like buttons, subscribe buttons, and we'll be back at you next week.